Okay, hello everyone, welcome. My name is Jen Wetham and I am the program administrator for faculty. I am one of the program administrators for faculty development at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. Also on the call today is my colleague, Alyssa Sells, and Alyssa has the same position as I do, faculty development, and her expertise is in accessibility and e-learning, Canvas tools, Zoom. Actually, Alyssa has tons of expertise. And also I'd like to introduce Lucas Myers. He is biology faculty at Lower Columbia. He's been teaching a variety of biology courses online for many years, including the A&P sequence and other courses. And also, I just want to call recognition and honor to Bryce Battisti, who is also here from Bates Technical College. And Bryce has been teaching online for a very long time, and both Lucas and Bryce both did lifeboat strategy seminars. So welcome to, and we also have just a really great group of people. Many of you joined us this morning for our majors biology conversation, which was pretty awesome. Well, it was more than pretty awesome. It was awesome. So with that, one of the ways that we like to get started is have everyone just type into the chat. This is a single most important question. So if you had to think right now about your biggest question, your biggest concern, your biggest challenge or problem of practice when it comes to transitioning your BIOL&160 online, what would that be? So just go ahead and type into the chat, and while you're doing that, I am going to move through a couple more slides. And thanks to folks who are writing into the chat right now. So those of you who are here in the morning, or those of you who have been on here before, you know that this is my new favorite joke about COVID-19. I don't know if any of you have seen that meme. It's introverts unite separately in your own home. And because I know and love many introverts, I have always enjoyed that meme. And I think it's particularly apropos for COVID-19. Let's unite together separately in our own homes. So in today's meeting, I would like to have, I'd like to talk a little bit about why communities of practice for COVID-19, like why this model makes sense. We'd really like to uncover questions, problems of practice, and challenges, and begin to identify how other folks are tackling those and handling them. There are a lot of people who have been teaching biology &160 online for a long time, and there's a lot of fully built out courses that you can basically just go into the Canvas Commons and replicate, modify and adapt. But also we'd like to possibly continue to meet and continue to share resources, and we'd like to maybe create an open Canvas shell, but make sure that it's organized in a way that makes sense for this group. So I'll just say that in chemistry, the way that they wanted to organize their Canvas shell, Chem 110, Chem &110 is a big sticking point for a lot of folks. And they also, OChem is also a place where people are really struggling to figure out what to do. So we've organized the Canvas shell in a way that makes sense for that community of practice. And so that's really our goal for today, is to figure out what kind of organizational structure makes sense to share our resources and talk about next steps. For communities of practice, I know that a lot of faculty right now are shouldering the invention, the work of invention, the work of creation, the work of content design on their own. And that is how we've been trained. We are trained to work alone. We're trained to work, my faculty, my classroom, my students. And so again, with a course like BIO&160, lots of people teach it. So what I'm really hoping is that in addition to sharing resources, if there are things that need to be created, that we could work together to create those, so that not everybody has to just be doing all their work in isolation. And again, we can invent new solutions for these extraordinary times, and we can do so best when we're working in collaboration. And also, just let's find solace, comfort, and inspiration in community with each other. At no other time, I think, have we needed each other so much. So I'm very excited about these communities of practice that have been forming around chemistry, A&P, majors, biology, etc. So for our first part of today, we really want to start to uncover the challenges and problems of practice. And Lucas Myers, I'm wondering if what you're seeing in the chat, where we might begin.
Yeah. Hi, this is Lucas. I've been taking notes here on my document for what I'm seeing. I think that a good place to start, there's two spots. I think either one looking at student support in the online environment, or the other one would be labs. Those are both two of the main things I'm seeing showing up is how do we support students in often their first science class with some rigor and demand on the college campus, and then now it's been put online. And the other part is how do we have quality labs, or if we're using a lab simulation, how do we deal with the technology and support for students there? So those two are the main, two of the bigger ones, and then assessment is another one, but I think that's been common in every one of these communities of practice meetings we've had. So that's something we can talk about down the road as well.
Lucas, my gut is, first of all, thank you for that summary. And Cece sounds that she said those sound like the two biggest problems here. So we already have an affirmation in the chat. Thank you, Cece. Lucas, do you think my gut is that we should start with supporting students? Or do you feel comfortable with that? Is that what your gut says?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, great. So I think what I would like to do is maybe start with a couple different suggestions. And I think if we could start with technology problems with new students, providing good support for struggling students. One best practice that I have been thinking about a lot and that we promoted in the Lifeboat strategy sessions is to do a technology survey with your students. And we have a good sample from Mark Barrington at Green River College that I can put into the chat. But really, you know, checking, and especially checking in with your students who don't have access to tech and helping them brainstorm, or helping them, supporting them, getting access to resources that will help them complete the course. Another one is to do an intro to Canvas module, and we've got some really good examples in the Canvas Commons. Tish Lopez and Mark Barrington, who did Lifeboat strategy seminars, have both offered up their Get to Know Canvas strategies modules. What other wisdom or expertise do people have around supporting students in terms of the technology? Alyssa, do you want to, so actually Lucas has something in the chat, week 0 and tech surveys, and Alyssa has some comments. So Alyssa, could we start with you? Could you, as our e-learning expert, what are you thinking about right now?
Sure. I agree with everything you've already said. I agree with what Lucas has in the chat. I agree with what's been offered in the other Lifeboat sessions. There have been some really great options shared by the presenters. One other thing to consider is offering some low stakes practice or troubleshooting sessions before some things actually due, so that students have an opportunity to work out some of their technology issues beforehand. That is often helpful. And then once they've tried it, they have a better idea of where they're going to struggle, and then they could come to you maybe in like an open lab time or like some help sessions where they could come and ask you about specific things they're encountering, and you can be kind of the first line of defense for tech issues depending on the product that you're using. One example would be like if you're using some sort of a lab simulator, your IT or your e-learning office is not going to be as familiar with that as you will be because you're the one that's using it. So you're probably going to be more of an expert on that, but don't hesitate to reach out for help if you need help. And then like for Canvas, you can also offer Canvas tips and like information in your START module or where to access resources, but also directing students to like the help desk for the college for getting like e-learning assistance can also help them get some questions answered if you're not readily available. I also like to provide the Ask a Question module that stays active all session for me. My sessions are 3 weeks. I'm not teaching quarterly like you all are. But I leave a module called Ask a Question open with an Ask a Question discussion where all types of course related questions can be asked and answered. And I ask students to help each other out there. So I can help them or another student can help them just depending on who's in the class at that time. I do always double check and make sure that the student has answered with enough information to help whoever they were trying to help. But it's really great to see them help each other. So those would be some things that I think might lend support for students.
And I spent this weekend, even though I promised my partner I wouldn't work on the weekend, loading everything, all the lifeboat strategy sessions, resources into one Canvas shell. And
Oh,
Tish
nice.
Lopez, I know, I'm so excited about
Thanks,
it.
Jen.
The things I never thought I would get excited about. And Tish Lopez actually created a whole Canvas shell with her resources. So for folks, okay, Cece, you can't wait to see that shell. I'm going to make it happen right now. I'm going to post it. I'm going to post the link to the chat so you can see all the cool things in it. And before we go on, one thing that I didn't do that I wanted to do was ask people to kind of clarify the problem. So that's something we've been doing is just, when people post things to the chat, we ask them first to kind of explain and unpack, but I was so excited to just get started. I skipped that step. So, so before we brainstorm more solutions, I'm wondering if someone who typed in their concern about supporting students would be willing to just say a few words about what that's looking like in your heart and in your mind right now.
Sure, I can do that.
Thanks, Cece. I was thinking about you. So how perfect.
We have a lot of attrition in BIOL&160, as I'm sure everybody does. And our biggest concern is always the underserved populations and our systemically non-dominant populations, because our data shows that they tend to be the first that we lose. So we're really concerned with, as we make that move to online, are there things that we can do that will end up improving their experience over what they're seeing face to face? And if so, what could that look like? And I saw a few of our strategies pop up in here, having the question area open all the time, or trying to set up some one-on-one meetings early on to help them with issues. So I think we're all kind of in the same boat on that.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for speaking to the needs of systemically non-dominant students during this time. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's from Dr. Deborah Jenkins at Clark College. And and systemically non-dominant populations is her language. Another term that you might be familiar with is historically underserved students of color. And again, we know that there are already equity gaps in all of our courses, but equity gaps are opportunity gaps and equity gaps are exacerbated in the online environment. So Cece, thank you for speaking to the need that we double, triple, quadruple, exponentially magnify our efforts around how we serve historically underserved students of color in our course design, in our assignment design, in how we think about the technology. Thank you so much. So one thing that I would love to ask is Stephanie Hoffman, could you speak to how Green River is talking about, how Green River is thinking about this?
So this is something our e-learning group did at the end of last quarter when we all went to online. I think they had already had something mocked up and they rushed it out, and they literally enrolled every single student into a just an orientation course. And so it had, here is a practice quiz. Here is a practice respondus lockdown quiz. Here's one that is a practice quiz that requires a webcam. Here are video links. And so it literally walks students through, like, how do I watch a Panopto video? How do I turn in a file? And they enrolled every single student. We currently don't have a way to require students to do that and then get that information and like lock our course to them trying it out there. But if students are like, I don't know how to do this, we just can tell them, go to your orientation course, because they've got it set up. And so we've been able to rely on that to kind of get through some of the basic tech stuff. I'm having my students use Excel or Google Sheets for their labs for the first couple. And so for that, then I was doing the one-on-one Zoom, because our IT is currently hammered with everything else that's going on. But yeah, so that's what Green River has set up for us. That's been really helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing. And for those of you who, I think, Sari, you have a comment here. I really need that orientation course Stephanie is talking about, because I can't do tech troubleshooting. I can barely do it myself. And for those of you who are in a similar situation, I think the Intro to Canvas modules that you could include in your course are a really great walkthrough. So we'll make sure that this group gets suited up with those. But I think too, if your e-learning department hasn't been in communication with how they're supporting students, just a quick email to your e-learning director, I think would also be a good move, because I know Alyssa and I are both on the ELC listserv, and there's a lot of e-learning directors working day and night to try to think about how to support students. So we've got Intro to Canvas modules. Lucas just talked about that. Let's see, I wanted to maybe ask, what else are people doing to, I think maybe this might be an opportunity to talk about tech, because the state board hasn't issued official guidance on equitable teaching in this environment yet. But I would say that from being in a lot of these conversations, and I'll ask Alyssa and Lucas to help me with this, I would encourage all of you to think first asynchronous. I know that there's a big temptation for folks that you want to create a face-to-face environment online, and Bryce Battisti and Lucas, I think, could speak to how the online environment is different. It's not bad or worse or better, it's just different. And that really thinking about asynchronous, low stakes, high impact, as low tech as possible. And also because a lot of students just don't have access to a dedicated laptop. They don't have access to a dedicated computer. They might be caring for family members. They might have kids at home. And actually, Sarah the Red, Sarah, is it okay if I call on you to talk about your experience watching students use Respondus Lockdown Browser? I've taken your name in vain many times over the past few days. I can't stop thinking about your description. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. Yeah, so I used Respondus Lockdown Browser at the end of last quarter for my students to take their exams, and went through afterwards and watched just the segments that it flagged and stuff for my students. And I had a bunch of students that had kids playing in the background, or family members watching TV, loud electronic toys, constantly having to ask another adult to take care of this kid while I do 10 more questions, smoke alarm with low battery beeping in the background, and was just kind of thinking about how would my students even find time to study or concentrate in that kind of environment. And that's really made me think about like the length of exams for my class, and trying to break things up into smaller chunks so that my students can hopefully find some kind of quiet time to do their coursework this quarter.
I had
Sarah,
a comment about
oh,
that
sorry,
too.
go ahead,
If I
Bryce, do it.
could just jump in for a second. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Sarah. I've been teaching biology classes online for a few years, and it's funny that this quarter it's different. Like they seem to not be able to cope with it as well. Same class, same setup, same everything from my end, but for them, a lot of them are already, well, we're 2 weeks in at Bates, but struggling to keep up, or they've got missing assignments where they wouldn't have other times. And I think part of it is that what's going on at home, and I suspect maybe part of it, because Jennifer, you started off talking about technology, is that maybe they were getting help that I wasn't giving them before. They were getting help from the librarian on campus. I know Mike Wood, our librarian, helps them all the time. They were in other classes. They were talking to people face to face. So they were getting their questions answered if they didn't know what to do. Anyway, it's funny that there's a difference with everything else being the same.
Or is everything else not the same? Or,
well, I mean, my class setup is the same. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm sorry. It was a lame attempt at a joke. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. But Bryce, thank you for offering that. And Lucas is just chiming in on the chat to say, yeah, great point. What are they not getting that they normally would get when campus is open?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would really ask that all faculty really take this into account. And Stephanie Hoffman has an update on the Canvas orientation, and you've raised your hand, you good student, you. Share with us.
So I just Microsoft Teams chatted one of our e-learning people, and she is willing to put our orientation course on the Commons if people would be interested in pulling from the Commons to see what is there. But she thinks that Cascadia, Renton Tech, and Columbia Basin all have something similar.
That is awesome. We already have an enthusiastic yes, great.
So I will let her know, and I'll find out what she calls it so I can put it in the chat.
Thank you so much. And the other thing that we can do is in the shared Canvas shell, if it's posted to Commons, is we can just include a link straight to it so folks can cut and paste, so folks can use it easily. And Amy Donovan, I just want to read this. Amy Donovan wrote, yes, please, even if we have something similar. So yes, please. Sarah and Bryce, thank you for your contributions around, things like Respondus Lockdown and Honor Lock, and, and students trying to replicate testing conditions in their homes. And I guess I would ask if Lucas or Alyssa or anyone who wants to could talk about what are some alternatives to assessment in this environment that aren't high stakes testing.
Yeah, Jen, I'll speak to that. And I just wanted to add a couple things, and I put them in the chat just to help make sure we keep that since we're saving the chat, was one thing you can do if and it depends on your campus and what's happening, because every campus is probably a little different at this point, and what you do with your tutors. But we've used our tutors in our online courses and set them up with their own discussion space so that students can reach specifically out to their peers, which oftentimes is very beneficial, especially if sometimes students feel like they are irritating us, even though they're not, and asking us a lot of tech questions, whatever. And so they are willing to ask tutors, and often our tutors are very good in using Canvas and know the answers and been trained by our e-learning department to answer a lot of those questions as kind of a meet the students where they are part of our e-learning methods on our campus. So that's something to look into is are you paying tutors right now? Are tutors working? Could you embed them? And that would be really beneficial for the content side as well, and supporting your students in Biology 160. One, it's new, it's science, it's online, they're stressed. This is a great spot for them to get that help. In terms of assessment, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can do it. I've taught Biology 160 online a lot of ways, but you can do this in all courses, is creating, especially right now, if you're jumping into this late, is creating shorter chunked tests if you're going to do tests, making them shorter. That way we don't have to deal with as many issues that we've been talking about around testing at home. If you're worried about the proctoring. You can use, there's honor lock and those things, but those are going to be complicated, as Sarah just talked about. You can just make things timed. You can let them have a notes page. You can make it less about this formal assessment and more about when they hit week 12 or week 11 or week 8, have they learned everything we needed them to learn? And less about, did they pass that test that was 70 questions on that day? Because in 6 weeks, sometimes I don't know that they could always pass that same test if they don't restudy it. So there's different ways to do that. There's case study approaches. There's inquiry case studies. There's all sorts of activities on HHMI Biointeractive where you're doing different activities to allow them to be assessed in different ways. I know Alyssa talks a lot about the universal learning design and allowing them to have their own choice in how they want to be assessed. So providing different options and letting them choose ways to be assessed. And I'm sure Alyssa can speak to that, but there's a lot of different ways you can assess a student, as well as writing test questions. And I think Alyssa's posting this in the chat right now about writing test questions that don't allow you just to look up the definition online, that actually are more, they provide more thought process and more, maybe more process oriented versus just kind of your rote memorization. So there's a lot of different ways. We could spend 2 hours talking about assessment, but there's definitely a need to look at your assessment design anytime you go online. And I think it's even more critical this spring.
So one thing, just there's a lot of really cool things happening in the chat right now. And so just for the sake of time, I'm going to say it's 3:30. So a couple things. One is, sorry, this is very important. Sarah, I know that Lake Washington uses the 4 connections. I'm so sorry, you're at Renton. so sorry. But I know that a lot of people at different colleges have used the 4 connections, which is basically, these are the 4 primary ways that faculty can boost retention. And I apologize if folks already have heard about this, but it is learn and know your students' names. So there's lots of easy ways, like when you're writing comments to students or chatting with students, make sure that you use their name. Encouraging students to use each other's names. So if you're setting up a discussion board, having students start by, dear Sarah, thank you so much for this response. So again, names are really important here. Know and learn your students' names. Check in with students frequently. There's lots of ways to check in with your students, even if it's an announcement, if it's an email to them in Canvas. And we can go into this in more detail in subsequent meetings, but right now I just want to give them to you. So know and learn your students, learn and know your students' names and use them. Check in with students frequently. The tech survey is another way to do that, to start that check-in process. Try, if you can, to schedule meetings with your students. And again, there's lots of creative ways, and Lake Washington has generated tons and tons of ways for faculty to do this. But I just think that's also important to, whether it's an email, whether it's a Zoom conversation, if the student has access to Zoom on their phone or however, but just again, having at least one check-in with your students, almost like a mandatory office hours. And again, trying to be flexible with students' varying schedules. And then the final one is practice paradox, which we've already sort of been talking about here, which is have very high standards, continue to have your high standards, but be flexible and creative in how students can meet those standards. And really the whole notion of practice paradox is being, providing challenge for your students, but doing so in a way that all students can be successful. So Alyssa, or anyone else who has expertise in the 4 connections, is there anything else you'd like to add about the 4 connections?
Hey, Jen, I don't have any expertise in it, but I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's awesome. And I think the work that Lake Washington has done with it is fabulous. So it's definitely a great resource to investigate. And even if you can only do one of the 4 connections, it's still one step toward engaging your students. I mean, just pick one thing you can do if you can't do all 4. I mean, everybody's overwhelmed right now. So pick something small, do what you can do, but each progressive thing that you do adds on and builds to the engagement for your students and that connection and relationship you're going to build with them, and they might build with each other.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how people would feel if we moved on to labs, knowing that we only have an hour and that there can definitely be future meetings where we can do deeper dives into things. So I think what I'd love to know is, I know that Bryce, I know that you use Labster, and Lucas, I know you use Labster. What are other people using or thinking about using for online labs?
So we were going to use SynBio for a few of our online labs, but we discovered a problem at the last minute. We had 3 SynBio labs set up for our BIOL&160 class, and apparently they don't work with Chromebooks, or there's a kind of complicated like technological fix to make them work with Chromebooks. So after thinking we were all ready with all of our labs that we'd scrambled and put together, we then had to re-scramble and put together 3 more labs. So SynBio has a workaround, but they have to access a remote desktop. And I just figure that's putting one more technological layer of complexity. And honestly, my BIOL&160 students are just, some of them are really, you know, they've done a lot with technology, and others are like, I have never touched anything. So I just can't do that with my BIOL&160 class. So I had to give up on SynBio, and we switched to HHMI Biointeractive and putting together some basic things to solve the problem. But it's not perfect because I like SynBio labs, but
So
anyways.
Katie, first of all, thank you for being so respectful of students' access to tech. I know this is a huge concern also with Labster, that students have to have a dedicated desktop to use it. They can't use it on a Chromebook. They can't do it on their phone. So thank you for being sensitive to that. And one thing that I am really hoping for as a result of this BIO&160 group is that as people create low stakes, high impact, low tech solutions to labs based on certain concepts, that we might be able to share the wealth. So if there's certain shared outcomes for BIO&160, that we could start to populate the Canvas shell with what people are using, so then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm seeing some things in the chat. And so Cece, do you think you could talk a little bit about your homebrew labs that involve household materials and live streaming?
Sure. We were originally actually going to make little kits to send home, and then we realized that we don't have a good distribution method for students that are reliant on public transport, which is a fairly large number of ours, or that are high schoolers and may have other limitations. So our first lab is actually a paper chromatography lab using either coffee filters, paper towels, or a material of students' choice. And then we're going to have them essentially build a hypothesis and a set of questions that they're going to test. And then we're going to do a live stream session where we run a few of those. And then we'll have them either post short videos or their own set of data in a discussion board that'll give them a chance to kind of share and analyze. And then what we'd like to do is actually tie that back to protein chromatography and how we determined like structure of, I don't know, say the COVID-19 virus that they're all interested in right now. So that they get kind of this feeling of, hey, we've got some scientific exploration, we can get our kids involved in it, and we're picking up the scientific method and the beginnings of our chemistry lab. So we've got one person who's writing that now. We've got that about 70% there. And then we're trying to modify the rest of the labs that we have so that like their water chemistry one, they'll have to have ice, salt, some sort of a colored dye, which could be, you know, like juice or, you know, the tip of a pen or something to look at diffusion. we haven't quite figured out exactly what we're doing with osmosis yet, but probably vegetables or potatoes in salt or sugar water. But the idea being that they'll get a set of instructions, and then we'll be able to kind of get some common data as well as some data that we generate for them to analyze. But the idea will be that it can be done at home in an exploratory environment.
There's lots that I love about this. Alyssa is saying she loves it too for super creative out of the box thinking. I also like the way that you're thinking about it in terms of outcomes and how to sequence it and how to contextualize it. And you were on the call this morning when I mentioned this, but we know that contextualization is a great way to motivate students, and especially students of color from historically underserved populations. So thanks for contextualizing, thanks for thinking about contextualizing COVID-19.
We also really wanted to prioritize allowing students to get kids involved for those that have kids, but also not have that be the focus. So the idea being that if you can include your 4-year-old in what you're doing, you're much more likely to be able to find time to do it. So we wanted to maximize kind of the impact of allowing them to get, hey, here's our kids' science lesson at the same time. And we figure if we can level it enough that they can explain it to the kid that's helping them with their paper chromatography, we're going to get better buy-in.
That is awesome. I love that. Katrina Fuller also mentioned doing a lab that the kids love, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. She teaches microbiology online. Yeah, so I think this is really great. Lucas has something to say about spinach leaves and osmosis. Lucas, what are you thinking?
Oh, if you're doing osmosis at home, but it would require you having like a fold scope or something too, so you can see the inside of it. So it's a little more complicated than just using potatoes or some of those things to see the expansion. So there's other ways to do it. Just if you wanted to look at the cellular process of osmosis and you had a fold scope, which they can create fold scopes at home, which we
What's the cost on a fold scope?
You can do it for free, or I shouldn't say free. You might have to go pick up a couple items that are pretty cheap. You can do it for under $10, under $5, I think.
We're trying to do zero cost if possible, but that might be a fun optional.
Yeah, and they might even have the supplies at their house. Honestly, there's a lot of the supplies for the fold scopes that sometimes people have at their house from doing different, just activities in their own. But that's just, I threw that on there when you guys were talking about osmosis as one you can do. Flynn Scientific is also doing a lot of live wet labs, and you can watch them live or you can watch a recording. Some of them right now are a little more chemistry oriented, but we know in Biology 160 there's a bit of that. And so there's some really good live labs there that you can also get worksheets for, add questions to, and it'd be the same thing as you recorded in your lab, but it's already done for you. And that saves you time from going to your campus and going through all that process as well. They also have a whole section on student lab activities that you can do at home. They're categorized as high school level, but we also know that a lot of times it's very similar, Biology 160 to a lot of these activities. And sometimes they didn't take any biology in high school, or maybe they did early on. So I'll throw that link in there as well for you. I'll throw it in the chat. But those are good places to look for some of the Biology 160's activities beyond what we've already talked about. I think all the things that we've mentioned are really good. Anything you can do at home in the kitchen, which is really easy to do with 160, I think is really a good way to go for these students.
So one thing that I'm seeing in the chat, Amy Donovan has mentioned Katrina Fuller's folding microscopes activity. So we will make sure that gets into the shared Canvas shell. So if folks want to see kind of a folding microscope, fold scope, how to do it, and then you could modify and adapt it. And Suri, I think I'm saying your name correctly. Please correct me if I'm not. Could you take the mic and share your microbes lab, please? That sounds fascinating.
There you go. Sure. So I'm at SCC, and so we have a first introductory lab that we do that's microbes, where usually the students go around and swab the surfaces and grow something on a Petri plate and see what happens. So I just did the same thing. I tried it at home and it worked great. I just used pieces of old bread, and unmoldy bread at the time, and I just smeared bread around different places, and I sprayed some of it with Lysol disinfectant, and then stuck them in baggies and in a warm spot or in a cold spot, whatever. And it actually worked. Some of it grew great, some of it didn't grow anything, and the students can set up a hypothesis in their own little experiment of what exactly they want to test. So I'm gonna that's ready to go. I'm gonna use that for one of my intro labs this week, actually.
If you don't mind sharing that, that would be awesome. And
Absolutely.
And Amy Donovan wrote, "That's so gross and so awesome." And Cece wrote, "Gross but super fun."
Yeah, so they can pick what they want to try to, culture, what their culture media is. So if they want to use a fruit or a vegetable or whatever they want to try to grow mold on is fine then.
This is awesome. This is awesome. And again, if everybody just posts one thing that they can share together, we can build a lot. So one thing that I would like to do is just say for A&P, for example, we're organizing the Canvas shell around 241 and 242, and then the 5 major systems that are taught in each of those courses. And so I'm wondering if for BIO&160, what is the best way to organize the Canvas shell so it's useful, so folks can come in and say, I need X, Y, or Z. Lucas, you might have some ideas, like are there shared learning outcomes for this course? What are the sort of needs that people have? And I'll just give one more example from botany. Oh, Lucas, what was the example from botany? They wanted to know about microscopes, and is it transcription? Is that the term?
Well, it was transpiration, but you're close. Transcription's more in line with this course, but they looked at virtual microscopes, field work. It was more around types of activities that they could design versus content. That was kind of their approach. And we've seen that in chemistry and different ones. Chemistry was more about, because it was all of them, the different courses. 160 definitely has a specific set of material that's consistent for the most part, but it depends on what everybody, if we wanted to focus on lab and lab content or specific activities, it'd be interesting to see what people are thinking.
So before we get to that point, people are dying for your labs, your home labs around cancer, genetics, and cell division. And that you've designed embedded activities around real cancer data. Lots of people are interested in that. So yes, please.
Yes, Jen has seen these as well. We worked with Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle a while back. So I have like 3 or 4 that work with real cancer data using databases online that go through looking at cell division and that whole cell cycle and everything. So I'm happy to share those. They may or may not be useful to you. I taught 160 completely through the lens of cancer, and so they were really useful in that. But there's a couple, maybe the first 2 that I think would probably be good as like ad hoc labs that make them look at data and cell division.
Lucas, thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wants to talk about a lab before we move into the organization of the Canvas shell? Okay, so maybe what else, like when we think about what you would go to a Canvas shell for, what else? Oh, and Sarah actually has a lab that she can talk about. Sarah, do you want to talk about the lab real quick?
Sure.
Yay, Sarah the Red.
I've done one in class before. Haven't done it at home, where you grind up a potato, and potatoes have high concentration of the enzyme catalase, which breaks down hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen. And normally they dip a filter paper into the potato juice catalase, and then they drop it into a test tube of hydrogen peroxide, and then the rate at which the bubbles form and make the paper rise tells you how fast the enzyme is working. And you can have them dilute the hydrogen peroxide so they can see how substrate concentration affects it. or like heat it up and see how temperature affects it. And I've let them choose different kinds of things to make a hypothesis out of. They could like add lemon juice to see how pH affects it or something like that. They just have to find some kind of container other than a test tube to put their hydrogen peroxide in. It seems like it could be pretty well adapted to do at home. Shot glass. Cece wrote shot glass in the chat.
I love this group. You guys are great. So I think one thing that I would need from folks who are in this room for next steps is, one, if you're interested in being added to a very special BIO&160 Canvas shell, if you could type your email into the chat. And this will be a way for us to share a lot of the resources that we've talked about today. And also we will we'll work to make sure that it's organized in a coherent way. I think the other thing that I would like to know from this group is, would you be interested in meeting regularly as we move through the quarter to do, like, so people can kind of share, here's what I'm doing, here's how it's working. And I'm seeing people, yes, please. We can also do special topics. Like Lucas, I know, has a lot of experience with creating engagement in Canvas shells using some of the Canvas tools around discussions. So I think there's lots of things we could do together as a deeper dive. Okay, so I'm seeing yes. And I think my biggest question is, does this day and time work for a standing meeting? I know for some of you who are in the majors group, this means that you'd have 2 meetings on one day, but maybe that's okay. Natalie, I have no schedule. So again, just trying to, okay, so if this day and time is working for folks, and I understand that it might shift, but just as we're trying to get these organized, I'm just finding that if we have an established meeting time, it's one less ball to drop. And CC also can designate a team member to join, and we'll always record them and post them to the Canvas shell. So Lucas is asking for organization ideas for the Canvas course: labs, specific content areas that are harder, assessment resources, virtual simulations, other ideas. When you think about what you would want in a Canvas shell, what are some of the categories? Okay, lab topics. That's a great idea. Stephanie backs that, both of them. Oh, student support ideas. Yes, Jennifer, thank you for raising that. We can definitely talk about that more. Okay, yes, for both. Okay.
And Lynn said, she sent it to me, I think accidentally, but virtual simulations as well.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I also wanted to let you know too, and if you could spread this word to your colleagues, that would help me a lot, because my email right now is just a backlog of things. So I sent out an announcement today that there's going to be a state board demo of Labster tomorrow at 11 a.m. And so for those of you who are interested in learning more about what is Labster, how does it work, why does it work, how does it integrate with Canvas, what's available, that demo is at 11 o'clock tomorrow. And we can, yeah, Sarah, Labster is, I want to say it's like 50. Actually, Lucas, you guys use Labster and Bryce uses Labster. So could you talk about how you guys use Labster and how you fund it while I look for the URL for the Labster meeting?
Yeah. We work, so it's, if you go to their website or if you just talk to them, they're probably going to tell you, well, it's $50 or $60 for 5 and it's $85 for 10 labs, but it's not true. If you talk to one of their reps, what you'll find out right now is you can use their labs for free this quarter. You just don't get the grading with it. So students can actually work through the labs for free. You just don't get all the grading and teacher access to it like you normally would. But if you work with a rep and actually kind of talk to them and negotiate. You can figure out your pricing based on the number of students you serve. We get it. I had to renegotiate it this year, but we get 10 to 12 labs for all the courses we use, which is Biology 160, Microbiology, and Anatomy Physiology online, and we get it for $49. We keep it under the $50 affordable educational resources cutoff. Since our textbook is free for them in all those courses, we feel like $49 is still a really good investment. Students have to pay that. We don't pay for it as a college, so they pay for the code through the bookstore or mainly through the bookstore anymore. But that's what we got, the price we got for it. So it just depends on kind of what you work there. But if the state board decides to fund it, then that would be different. But I know there's a lot of questions around access and usability, especially this spring as we have more and more people online using it. But
yeah, and so this is Bryce. I've actually tried a bunch of different models with Labster, and that price seems right. I wonder, Lucas, if they're increasing their prices though, because it seems like every time somebody asks these days, they get a higher price quote than my students get. So we did it that way for about a year, where we had the students pay for it themselves and kept it under $50, and that was really great. And I also use an online OER book for the text. And then Bates agreed to start paying for it. So now they just have, I don't know if it's an annual contract, it must be a quarterly contract that they renew, and Bates is paying for it. But then also now I'm teaching at Pierce and Clover Park, and they agreed to pay for it this quarter as well and got quoted higher prices. And so then, yeah, we had to talk to the rep and get that negotiated down. It's all a negotiation.
Yeah, they definitely increased their prices from when they first started. And so we had to negotiate that. I actually negotiated that this week because one of my other colleagues was trying to get his course set up, and they told him a ton of money, and then it caused, chaos. And so I had to actually call and get our contract set up for next year. We do annual contracts that start in the summer to the following summer. And so we have for the whole next year, $49 per student. At some point, I'd like the college to cover. That's a great setup you guys have, Bryce.
Yeah.
Thanks to both of you. Alyssa just posted to the chat that a reminder that Labster is not fully accessible and is also not mobile friendly. And Lucas, it looks like it does integrate with Chrome, you said, or Chromebooks, or
yeah.
I saw that you posted something in the chat. So it's not as bad as I thought, but
yeah, it does work with the Chromebooks, but yeah, I mean, it's not fully accessible, as really most of your virtual lab simulations aren't. And then, although, I mean, their websites will say they comply with ADA, but not to the level that I know the state board would like. And then a lot of students may not have the internet or the technology, a computer at home. A lot of our students I know had been coming to campus to learn Labster at times. So that'll be an issue. I know a lot of our teachers aren't. I know all of our Biology 160 teachers are using Labster this quarter. So it'll be interesting to hear what I find out, because Biology 160 is a completely different environment. When I teach A&P online, those students have gone through 2 or 3 courses already online. And so they're a different type of student than you get in Biology 160, as I know. It's a whole different world in terms of the questions and the tech issues. So it'll be interesting as we go through spring to see how Labster works in this situation, and kind of what we decide moving forward with, if the summer or the fall, if we still dealing with COVID-19.
So I am an optimist, as those of you who know me. I'm very much an optimist. And also I have been sort of just preparing that we're going to be teaching online and remotely until at least fall quarter. And I'm sort of gearing myself up to be prepared for remote conditions to be continued over the fall, given that there might be, and I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't even know if I'm saying that term correctly, but again, like, just as I'm sort of anticipating that some of these conditions will persist longer than we would like them to. And so I'm really, thank you. Lucas is like, you got it right. I'm like, yay. So one thing that I would hope for with these communities of practice, this one in particular, or all of them, is can we create low stakes, high impact low cost or free lab solutions that don't require a lot of bandwidth and that provide students with deep learning experiences that could be fun. I love the one that this group has suggested that possibly they could even include kids. Yeah, and Cece's like, we're on it already. I would so much rather invest resources into our faculty than into Labster. And again, that's just me speaking. And I think it's possible, and I think we could create some really cool things together that would last us into the fall. And Lucas, oh, I love this idea. Is it Barcin? How could you, do you want to speak to this suggestion? I think this is really great.
Hi, this is Barch Nakar from Lake Washington.
Hi.
I did approach our gaming and design faculty and ask if they can actually help us out with the virtual labs, because Labster is amazingly expensive and I don't know how it's going to work this quarter. So anyways, it takes a lot of effort on their part, and it takes a lot of resources on their part to build virtual labs. Our gaming and design faculty told me that they already worked with, a few years back, they already worked with Yale, but that effort did not go farther. So we'll see.
What brilliant thinking. And maybe that's something that we could sort of, maybe they could have a COP that could help our COP. I mean, that could be kind of cool. One thing, you also wrote something really beautiful in the chat earlier about knowing and using students' names. Would you be willing to share that about correct pronunciation? And you could use me as the model.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of students would have different types of names, like mine, right? So it's really, really easy to ask them, what is the correct pronunciation? What is your preferred way of, how can I address you so that I don't butcher the name, right? It happens to me all the time. It happens to me all the time. So, and students like that. Students like to be addressed with their preferred names. So that's one thing. Another thing is, since we have been using the 4 connections, scheduling one-on-one time is really difficult.
Yeah.
Especially if you're teaching 150 students. That's a lot of time on your hands. So what you can do is, as you are going through your own class, you can just use the chat window to privately address the student, hey, how's it going, while they're doing some kind of an activity perhaps. That works. So not necessarily, a 10-minute, 15-minute, maybe half-hour appointment. We're talking about, hey, how's it going? How are your kids doing? How are you handling this? Very small check-ins here and there would help. So try it.
Yes, and also thank you so much for that guidance. I feel like I just learned a lot just hearing you talk about that, and so thank you for
You're
being
welcome.
willing to share. I appreciate it, and we're also seeing, again, like this comment. We're seeing like a lot of people just saying, like, I want to keep meeting. Not just during COVID-19, but can we check in with this group each quarter or once a year? It's so helpful. Could we even have a face-to-face meeting when face-to-face is safe again? And that is my big dream, is that we might, like, suddenly I think there's reason and opportunity for all of us to come together and learn from each other in exactly the way that we're doing today. And I would love to have continued meetings way past COVID-19, so we can all kind of, quote unquote, get on the same page and learn from each other. It is so inspiring and helpful. Sarah has another conversation. She has another idea. Sarah, do you want to share that with us?
Sure. I was just thinking about the 4 connections idea of meeting with each student a little bit at the beginning of the quarter, and might be a little bit difficult online when we have a lot of students. But I've also been thinking a lot about how to connect them with each other so that they can use each other as resources and talk about study together and stuff like that. So I'm thinking about maybe doing little short Zoom meetings and trying to get everybody to join a group of like 4 other students or so, so that they can sort of introduce themselves to each other and me and make connections with me, but also with a few of their classmates at the same time.
Sarah, you could use the Canvas learning teams to set that up pretty easily in groups of 4 for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great suggestion. So we're a little bit over, and I know people have to leave. And so please make sure I have your email address so I can put you into the Canvas shell and communicate with you again. I'm just going to go ahead and schedule our next meeting for this same time, same day. And I think we can check in with each other. We can see how the Canvas shell is working. We can see if there's new challenges that are popping up, crowdsource some wisdom, maybe do a deeper dive into a topic or two. But for now, I want to say thank you so much to everyone for coming. For those of you who this is your second meeting of the day, really grateful to you for making the time. I know your time is valuable. And you're a lovely group of people, and you're working so hard to serve our students equitably and well, and I'm so grateful. And thanks for being willing to share with each other. Yeah, applause. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.